After the Light Died, Chapters 17 and 18, The Debt of Blood. Governor Taney sat at his desk. The digital pen in his hand was tapping relentlessly on the screen that served as the desk's surface. It was an old habit, one born of the dark days when he'd had to write notes for the Revolution with ink pens on broken wooden desks, a far cry from his present state, but the habit endured. As a consequence, the screen continued flashing like a flashlight off and on as it continuously cycled into sleep from the access screen and back again. In front of him was the reason for his anxious tapping. Robert Kang, the first man to set foot on a new world, a man whose landmark words and steps forward on alien soil was now etched into history. He was now billed as a hero of Terra, a bright and shining example of human ambition, courage, and will. And now he has to open up the ugliest can of worms I've ever seen and show me this. The governor cursed his ill luck with every thought. The screen Robert was showing him was of the interview with the alien creeper. They call themselves Catchy, and this world Kalak, he explained, and the governor frowned. Is that supposed to mean something? He demanded. Their name for themselves means nesters, and the world name means place put together, and they mean place for nesters. Their language seems to center on linking concepts, and words don't have an individual meaning. You can't just say cave, you have to say what the cave is, such as a nesting cave or burial cave or resting cave. It works like that. Robert shook the distracting thought off. The point is they have a language. These are people. Not an invasive species that'll damage crops. We have to put a stop to the slaughter before we're guilty of genocide. Robert slammed his fist down on the table, and the governor instinctively shot to his feet. Nonsense, the governor insisted with a dismissive chopping motion of his hand. You're talking to dogs and pretending they're people. All right, maybe they can make some interesting tools. But so do chimpanzees, and even gorillas have learned sign language. There's nothing you've shown that suggests we should even consider stopping. These things can only get in the way of Terran ascendancy. We can't have that. If we stop for every species that can't compete worth a damn, we might as well go back to living in caves ourselves. The governor slammed his fist down on the table as emphatically as Robert and then snapped. Besides, it doesn't matter. They're aliens. Aliens have no rights any human is bound to respect. If they get the chance, they'll oppress us, so we need to get rid of them all now. Whether they die off or live on their whatever passes for knees, no alien must ever be allowed to threaten mankind ever again. Or... The governor narrowed his eyes. Are you a sympathizer? Robert's head snapped back as if he'd been slapped. Sympathizers were those who argued that aliens were entitled to due process, that the captured occupiers should be given trials as complete as any Terrans and shown clemency if it couldn't be proven that they'd actually committed any war crimes. The prevailing sentiment, however, was and remained to be an alien on an occupied Terra was a confession of guilt, and therefore trials would be a waste of time, with the result being that they were simply executed whenever possible. Sympathizers were equated in the media with turncoats, traitors, collaborators, and criminals of the highest order. I fought for humanity, you son of a bitch! Robert snarled and closed both hands into fists as he rose to his feet. I laid bomb traps on the roads. I sniped aliens from buildings. I bled for mankind. That's why I was given a spot on the first colony ship. Same as you, same as everybody else on this blasted world. And now I'm telling you I'm still fighting for humanity. Not for our survival, but for our souls. I don't want us to become what we fought against. The governor's face turned beet red, and when he shouted, flecks of spittle flew out past his lips to land on Robert's face. Get out! And don't you dare let me hear about you saying a word of your ridiculous claims to anybody else, or you'll be lucky if you're just clapped in irons. Damn you. I'll get out, but you have the footage, you have the record of my findings. You have no choice but to route them onto the science division. If you refuse, well, you know the penalty for hiding information. Robert hissed the last words as if they were a threat, and they were. When Robert was gone, Governor Taney did as Robert said and routed the information to the chief science officer for the new colony. No sooner than he'd done so, though, than he also reached out to the nascent security forces. "Gentlemen, we have a sympathizer in our ranks." That was all the governor needed to say, and the percussion guns were cocked. Magnus stared into the eyes of the divine fuckers whose fleet massed along his border. With the armada on the way back to the Sol system and these self-proclaimed debt collectors ready to move in, there was no choice but to give his answer now. "Will you submit to a payment plan to compensate your former employers for all the destruction that you caused in your lawless behavior?" the long-necked, narrow-headed alien asked, his long fingers tapping together impatiently in an all-too-human gesture. "Go fuck yourself," the Khan replied. "Terrans will never pay for our oppression. Send your fleet, and the only thing we'll send you are corpses." "We believe this would be your answer." That was all the transmission said before the border klaxon established in the Red House, which was the home of the Khan of all Terrans, began to blare. Magnus's head snapped reflexively toward the noise, and the screen on the wall below the rotating, glowing red light flickered on to reveal the sight of a fleet of 30 cruisers flickering into view, where the warp lines opened up into the wider solar system. "So," the speaker continued, "we will take the payment out in raw materials in the form of wreckage from the broken hulls of your ships, the ruins of your cities, and the labor of any of your people we capture. The divines deny that debtors can enter paradise, and therefore, in order to save your souls, we will use force." The transmission died, and while the cruisers slid through Terran space as easily as a fish went through water, he was already in motion. "Computer, open a private channel to the Milnet, then relay my words over the Ecom net." As soon as the double beeps indicated acknowledgement, he spoke, sending his words out over the entire military network. "Terrans, we have little time for words, but for you who are brave, few words serve as well as many. We are invaded, as you know. Our one-sided debt to our former masters was routed to a people who consider it their religious obligation to collect on debts. These divine evils have invaded our space and even now are moving to attack the Clenky system on the border. They promise to take slaves. They promise to take the broken hulks of our ships. They promise to take the ruins of our cities. I promise you they will only take fire and they will never leave. To all ships within reach of the Clenky system, you are hereby ordered to race to the border and preserve our space from harm. Allow no Xeno the freedom to take what is ours and use any means at your disposal to achieve victory." He paused and took a breath, then said, "To the people of Absolutia, not since Admiral Zheng he established the first Chinese colony in the New World, has danger been so obvious to those who would otherwise live in peace. But unlike the Norse colonists who met him on that fateful day, we are prepared for the danger ahead. Our scientists have outfitted our ships with the mightiest weapons, the hardest shields, the smartest artificial intelligences, and our academies have furnished the finest soldiers in the galaxy to man them all. We are ready for this threat. Do not give in to your fears. The light of alien ships will never blind us when we look at the sky ever again. We will fight. We will win." I wonder if it was a good idea to reference that movie, he pondered. The recently released film Ragnarok had smashed box office records with its gritty detailing of the war between the Vikings and the Chinese over the West Coast in the Middle Ages, with the first contact violence being particularly well known. It felt right, at least in the moment. Though if he were honest, it was in part because he was a fan of the director's version of The Merchant of Venice and the gritty scene in which the unfortunate merchant had his pound of flesh removed to pay his debt. We will fare better than that unfortunate soul, Magnus told himself, but before his thoughts could spiral out of control, a beep alerted him to an incoming communication from his sister. Khan, I wanted to inform you about the disposition of our fleets. She said, all formal, all business, as it should be in such times. The majority of our armada remains much too far away to help. It is racing back. But because we can't possibly make it to that system in time, I've ordered the greater armada to rally at New Germania. The colonists haven't even established themselves yet, and if we don't stop the invaders there... She didn't need to finish the statement. A single starter colony had a minimum of 20,000 people. The bare minimum deemed necessary to avoid genetic issues within a few generations. If the invaders reached the defenseless colony that had only one barely armed starbase meant for supply drop-off over it, then all of them would be carted off into slavery, and the aliens should go from there on a beeline to Terra. "Can you make even that in time?" Magnus asked and pursed his lips tight. Sweat began to bead on his brow. "Yes, but I've had to order 2 smaller fleets to use the experimental jump tech. The Clinky system is uninhabited. A mere energy station is the only thing there. But we can sacrifice a few ships to buy time. Just enough for the greater armada to reach a place where we can make a stand, and to get some of the newer ships to join us. Between those reinforcements and the greater armada, I believe we can win." Magnus didn't argue with the sacrifice. "For Absolutia," he said with approval. "Khan," she acknowledged and killed the link. Captain Rajendra bowed his head toward the icon of the holy city of Carthage. A devout follower of the Donatists, it was a religious obligation to bow one's head toward the city of their security at least twice per day, once in the morning and once in the evening, and had been ever since the destruction of Catholic Rimi in the 5th century. Though the great city had been rebuilt, it was with Donatist guidance, and in gratitude the followers of the true faith acknowledged the city that protected them as a place sacred to God. But since space had no ready way to tell which way the city lay, an icon was deemed sufficient as long as the act was done as it should have been on Terra. At the start of this shift, the captain repeated the gesture twice, once out of reverence, a second time in prayer. "Though I go into battle to die, I pray that my life of faith and courage has built a stairway high enough to reach paradise. In the name of Terra I go, for all mankind bless me, keep me, and welcome me home when my time comes." He was alone in his quarters when he said his prayer, but he was sure the rest of his small ship, and the little squadron that came with them, were all doing the same thing. It was soul-cleansing in a way nothing else could be in his mind, and so it was with quiet strength that he left his quarters, went to the bridge of his starship, and took his seat in the captain's chair. On the screen in front of him he could clearly see his face staring back at him. His mixed heritage of Germanic and Hindi ancestry would have been an obstacle to his life a few generations ago, a legacy of the German colonies from centuries before. It was one of the few things he could be grateful to aliens for, that in the face of true alienness humans were all more obviously human, and those legacies of rivalry were swallowed up by hatred of the Xeno-oppressors. And now their good turn was coming to bite them in the ass. The warp exit was coming up. Ready shields, ready weapons, and engage on sight. Evasion pattern Xeno 6. He said as the subspace notification came in that the little star base had been taken, which meant the crew was dead or captive. "Captain, what withdrawal pattern?" his first officer asked. Captain Rajendra's long face tensed. "None. There will be no retreat. As with Scipio, we fight to the death." "Sir." The acknowledgement came from the entire crew, and except for the slight tension in their bodies, there was no sign that they were anything other than ready for the end. With just 8 ships to the 30 invaders, things were grim. Making things worse, the jump tech decreased their available firepower by half for almost 3 straight months. If only we could have waited, he thought just as the warp line ended and the solar system opened up in front of him. Targets identified. 30 cruiser-sized warships. They're on our side of the star and will reach the next warp point in 8 hours on impulse power. Tactical reported, and the ships came on screen. They were sleek, long designs whose only bulge was a roughly ball shape at the back where engines and cargo could be held. A place for plunder, including our people. Fuck that. The captain had the crude, impious thought and gave the order at once. Let's make sure it's a lot longer than 8 hours. Engage. Captain Rajendra's voice was quiet, steady, devoid of outward wrath despite the inner rage at what they alien debt collectors intended. And his ships began to open fire. Missiles and torpedoes were the first to launch. Unimpacted by the energy cost associated with jump travel, they would soften the enemy up for the weaker blasters, phasers, and other energy-based weaponry. 12 impacted. Their shields are holding. Fire incoming. Evasion underway. Tactical reported when the missiles and torpedoes came out of the invader fleets. The 8 Terran ships scattered, rolling and evading as best they could. But with ship power reduced, every individual ship had to decide between more power to shields or engines or weapons, as only one could be properly boosted close to normal. I wonder what it says about us that every ship chose to power their weapons. Captain Rajendra pondered as his own ship rumbled and rattled around him. As the 2 fleets closed, energy weapons began to lance out across the night sea, blasting back and forth in a furtive kind of madness that would have been as beautiful as any fireworks show if it were not deadly. Within an hour, the first Terran ship was destroyed, not by fire, but by suicide run. For Terra! The transmission on the open net went out, and the battle-scarred Terran cruiser went to warp at close range and smashed into an alien ship, shattering both into a billion pieces which exploded out in every direction. From 8 they had become 7, but 7 became 6, became 5. Damage report, Captain Rajendra called out and clung to his seat. Forward weapons array destroyed. Engines leaking lethal radiation. Decks 5 and 6 have hull breaches, no life signs. We can't take another hit, Captain. The information came back and confirmed his worst thoughts. For Absolutia! Captain Rajendra shouted, stood, raised his hand, and pointed at the nearest looming enemy vessel. Ram them! The order wasn't acknowledged. After 3 such suicide runs and 2 destroyed vessels as a result, the invaders learned their lesson. His damaged ship, the AS Hannibal, was raked by the blasters of 6 cruisers and exploded before the engines would push the ship to warp. It exploded and scattered debris everywhere, and within an hour more the remaining ships suffered the same fate. In the aftermath, Admiral Tehran stared at the carnage. The shattered hulks of 8 ships that never had a chance at victory but had fought anyway, and he stared into nothingness, contemplating what lay ahead. Send a note to the rear, order a change to combat doctrine against Terran ships. Severely damaged vessels are to be completely destroyed before retargeting other vessels. His own first officer was startled by the order. His long neck pulsed red as doubt came over him. Sir, how will we take the cruise? We don't. Today taught us something, a lesson we need to learn if we hope to get anywhere. A Terran isn't out of the fight until they are dead, the Admiral said with grim certainty. Now begin repair and salvage operations. I want us ready to move on within 8 days. That order, at least, nobody questioned. The harvesting of starship hulks was too lucrative not to handle immediately, and too important to his career as a debt collector anyway, even if it weren't. And so for 6 days they collected all the scrap and wreckage they could, including from the 4 ships they'd lost, while they conducted repairs on the damaged vessels. Until the warp signatures blipped to life. Admiral Tehran shot up in his chair. How? Who? Where? We don't know, sir, but they're Terrans, and they emerged from the same warp point as the first group. Another 8 vessels. Weapons are armed, they're not here to talk. His tactical reported, and Admiral Tehran felt an anxious wave come over him that had nothing to do with the difficulty of the battle ahead.